Drayden trudged through the gray dust of the moon's surface, swearing softly under his breath as the wind tore at his helmet visor. The salvage job had seemed simple enough when he signed up: strip some old reactors, trade whatever worked for credits. But somehow, simplicity had turned into a cosmic farce. A panel had fallen on his foot, a scavenger drone had tried to bite him, and now his suit's internal comms crackled like a dying star. Great! One more misstep and I'll be a craterside pancake. Or worse, a pancake that owes someone else money. He muttered to no one, which was convenient because there really was no one around to judge him. That's when he heard it. Not a shout, not a beep, just a faint, high-pitched groan, like metal twisting under stress. Or perhaps the moon itself was trying to complain. Drayden squinted at the jagged horizon, where the shadows of abandoned mining rigs stretched like skeletal fingers. Well, I guess if it isn't trouble showing up early. He adjusted his pack and started toward the sound, half curious, half hoping it would be nothing more than a stray hoverbot in need of a new battery. The groaning grew louder as he approached a collapsed dome structure, half buried in ash. There, tangled in the wreckage, lay a figure. Drayden froze, swallowing a snort at first impression. She looked human enough, elegant even, but the long, tapered ears jutting from her silver hair betrayed her alien nature. The moonlight glinted off the metallic strands, giving her a halo effect he couldn't entirely admire because, well, she was bleeding, and that was never good. Hey, he called awkwardly. Don't know if you're into that whole hello thing, but I can patch you up if you don't mind a slightly incompetent human trying not to make things worse. He crouched beside her, grumbling about antiseptics he was pretty sure were outdated but looked official enough. And yes, I do have confidence. No, I don't have training. Yes, this is probably a bad idea. Aren't we having fun already? She made a faint, strained noise, a sort of whistle that could have been a cough or a protest at his humor. Drayden tilted her head gently, checking for a pulse. Alive. Good, mostly. Alive is better than crispy. We can work with alive. He dug through his pack, producing what he called a field kit, which mostly consisted of duct tape, bandages, and a few vials of alien-sounding chemicals he was never entirely sure were legal. As he worked, he kept talking, half to calm himself, half to annoy the unconscious princess. You know, in human terms, a little communication helps. I call it bedside banter. Maybe you'll forgive me later, or maybe you'll haunt me in your next life. Either way, fair warning, I'm hilarious. A shift of her eyebrows suggested she was annoyed, or at least that was what Drayden decided it was, interpreting subtle alien cues like a malfunctioning translator. The first problem arose when a spark from his improvised plasma torch ignited a small puddle of chemical antiseptic. Drayden yelped, dropped the torch, and scrambled to stomp it out, nearly tripping over her leg. Well, that's one way to get her attention, he muttered. Maybe she'll thank me in smoke signals later. Somehow, despite the chaos, the makeshift procedure started working, and the princess's breathing began to stabilize. Hours passed with Drayden alternately fixing injuries and cracking jokes. He mused aloud about alien royalty and their fashion sense, guessing that silver hair must be all the rage in her court, and wondering if long ears were ever accessorized with tiny glittering chains, because humans were weird about adornments. She twitched at one point, making him jump and laugh nervously. Oh, that's right, you can hear me. Excellent timing. I was just about to insult your species' dietary habits. Lucky escape, princess. When she finally opened her eyes, Drayden panicked just enough to knock over his toolkit. Ah, alive. And awake. Yes. You can now personally verify my medical incompetence. I assure you the prognosis is optimistic. She blinked slowly, her gaze sharp and calculating, yet not unkind. Drayden swallowed, realizing that humor might be the only way to bridge whatever silent tension existed between them. Don't look at me like that. I can see your ears twitching. That's an alien scowl. I've read about it, very intimidating. She spoke, her voice musical but tinged with the rasp of pain. Who are you? I'm Drayden, human, expert in questionable life choices. Mediocre at greetings, slightly better at patching up strangers. You. He gestured vaguely at her long ears and her regal bearing. Alien royalty in distress, yes, that's what I gathered. Good guess. She didn't answer immediately, which was a relief because Drayden was never good at silence. He took the opportunity to poke around the collapsed dome, pulling out twisted metal and muttering about interstellar building codes. Honestly, whoever designed these things clearly didn't think anyone would survive them. I mean, come on, structural integrity 101 people. By the time she could sit up with his help, Drayden was covered in grime and cuts, but proud. She stretched gracefully, long ears flicking like sensors, and gave him the faintest hint of a smile. You are persistent. Persistent is one way to put it. Heroic is another, but that's probably stretching it. Wait, don't smile like that. Makes me sound heroic, and I assure you I was mostly terrified. Terrified but witty. Very witty. She laughed quietly, the sound light but resonant, and Drayden felt, against all reason, that he could survive 100 more moons like this one. Somehow, through luck, improvised medicine, and a lot of awkward humor, he had saved someone not just important, but potentially powerful beyond imagining. And now, as the moon wind whistled around them and the first distant stars blinked awake, he realized that the galaxy had just shifted, quietly, inexorably, and that his life would never be the same again. By the way, he added with a mock-serious tone, brushing dust from his jacket, next time, try not to nearly die in a collapsed dome, okay? Makes field medicine stressful, and I'm running out of jokes. She only tilted her head, and Drayden, against his better judgment, hoped that tilt meant approval. Or maybe she was plotting subtle revenge for his clumsy attempts at heroism. Either way, he grinned. Adventure, apparently, had a long, pointy-eared face, and he was stuck with it. Drayden followed the alien princess through the labyrinthine corridors of her mother's palace, trying not to trip over anything. Gravity here had a sense of humor. Walkways twisted in impossible spirals, some hovering at odd angles, while others glimmered with a soft, blue bioluminescence that reacted to footsteps. Careful, he muttered, stepping gingerly. I've already survived one dome collapse, but I'm not auditioning for a zero-G dance-off just yet. She glanced back, her long ears twitching, and let out a small laugh, the sound light and musical. You humans are fragile, she said, though it carried no real offense, more like amusement at his cautious flailing. Fragile, yes, adaptable mostly, handsome occasionally. And hilarious, obviously, he added, gesturing at a nearby levitating lamp that shivered as he passed, setting it swinging like a pendulum. The princess simply shook her head and flicked her wrist, causing it to right itself with a soft hum. You have much to learn about how this palace operates, she said. Drayden nodded solemnly. Much to learn, indeed, starting with not accidentally pressing things that explode. Lesson 1. They reached a chamber where the light pooled like liquid, and she gestured toward the windows. Through them, he could see the city sprawled beneath them, a forest of crystalline towers, floating gardens, and energy ribbons stretching across the sky. He tried to look impressed, but all he could manage was a low whistle. You know, in my world we'd call that a bit flashy, but okay, very impressive. She tilted her head at him, amusement dancing in her eyes. Bit flashy. We are at the seat of royal power. Well, I guess I'm just a simple man from a dusty frontier moon. Bit flashy is my diplomatic vocabulary, he quipped. As they walked, she explained the subtle dynamics of her society, where loyalty and reputation mattered more than brute strength, though both were respected. Drayden nodded along, occasionally interrupting with human analogies that caused her to laugh. So, you're telling me that if I insult a minister's hat, it's worse than failing to feed a minor star system? Exactly, she said, smiling. And trust me, humans would handle that poorly. Noted, avoid hats, offend nobody, got it. At one point, they passed a hovering food vendor, selling nutrient pods that floated gently above silver trays. Drayden reached out, intrigued. Do they taste like anything? The princess shook her head, ears twitching. Not designed for humans, best to avoid unless you want glowing indigestion for a week. Challenge accepted, he said, popping a pod into his mouth. Moments later, he sputtered and coughed, waving his hands frantically. Okay, maybe a week of glowing indigestion is accurate. Very enlightening. She laughed, clearly entertained by his antics, and offered him water, which he accepted with exaggerated gratitude. nearly spilling half of it in his clumsiness. Their humor-laden tour continued until they reached the royal gardens, floating platforms teeming with plants that pulsed with soft lights, some drifting in zero-gravity arcs. Drayden marveled, stepping carefully. "This is insane, floating flowers, glowing leaves. I feel like I've stepped into a science fiction musical number." She raised an eyebrow. "Is that your way of complimenting or criticizing?" "Both," he said seriously, trying to balance on a platform that wobbled. "Simultaneous critique, a human specialty." She shook her head, amused, then flicked her wrist to stabilize the platform under his feet. "You are hopeless," she said softly. As they wandered, Drayden began noticing subtle signs of external tension. Scouts in the distance, minor palace alerts flashing in panels he didn't understand. She noticed him noticing. "Do you worry easily?" she asked. "I'm human," he replied. Worry is practically a birthright, also sarcasm, and apparently the ability to survive near-death experiences without crying. She laughed again, the sound echoing in the garden as if the plants themselves enjoyed it. A sudden alert blinked on a nearby console, prompting her to gesture at him. "You have a sense of timing, human. Follow me." He ran after her, tripping slightly, then catching himself on a floating railing. She looked back with an amused smirk. "I like that you run like a confused gazelle." "Noted. Confused gazelle. New code name for me." Inside a secure chamber, she activated a display showing incoming ships, identifying a rogue fleet of mercenaries intent on exploiting her mother's resources. Drayden leaned closer, eyes wide. "And what exactly do you want me to do? Stand here and look heroic?" She raised an eyebrow, almost daring him. "Your unique human ingenuity might be useful," she said, deliberately vague. "And by ingenuity, I mean survive long enough to make a difference." He saluted, mockingly dramatic. "Roger that, ma'am. Survive, check. Make heroic difference, slightly less check." Over the following hours, Drayden assisted in minor but critical preparations, improvising gadgets from palace supplies, and attempting to follow her complex instructions. He mixed humor into everything, joking about accidentally creating a small anti-gravity mishap that sent a stack of delicate energy vials floating like drunken meteors. She scowled but laughed, flicking her fingers to restore order. "You are reckless," she said. "Yes," he replied, "but memorably so. You'll thank me later." She didn't respond immediately, though her faint smile betrayed that she might. As they worked, he began to notice qualities in her beyond the royal exterior. Quick thinking, strategic foresight, and a playful intelligence that seemed to challenge him at every turn. He found himself matching her wits with humor, teasing her lightly about her preference for precision and her long ears, which he claimed gave her extra sensitivity for eavesdropping. Yes. She rolled her eyes but didn't deny it, letting the joke pass, her laughter making the tense preparations more bearable. By the time the first mercenary scouts were detected near the outskirts, Drayden had earned her trust. He wasn't just a human stumbling into palace intrigue. He was a participant, valued for his perspective, his humor, and the way he could improvise when the rules made no sense. She looked at him, long ears tilted slightly, eyes glinting. "You are unusual," she said, and he grinned. "I get that a lot." When the night fell over the floating city, Drayden and the princess paused to observe the lights below. He marveled at the scale, at the impossible elegance of her world, and at the fact that he somehow belonged here. "You know," he said softly, "I thought surviving one collapsed dome was my peak adventure. Turns out I might have been underestimating alien royalty." She smirked. "You have no idea. That's encouraging," he muttered. "I prefer to be pleasantly surprised. Keeps life spicy." As they settled for the night in a small observation chamber, Drayden reflected on the day. He had entered this palace expecting tension, politics, and perhaps danger. Instead, he had laughter, lessons, and an unusual alliance forming in the middle of a floating garden labyrinth. Somewhere beneath the humor and floating gardens, he knew that the rogue mercenaries approaching would change everything. But for now, he could revel in small victories, surviving, learning, and laughing with someone whose world was so different from his own. The universe, he realized, had a strange sense of timing, and he was just along for the ride. Drayden woke to the low hum of the palace, the soft glow of floating light panels casting his shadow long across the floor. The previous night had been restless. He had tried to sleep, but his mind was a tangle of floating gardens, bioluminescent corridors, and the mercenary fleet closing in like an uninvited storm. The princess was already awake, standing near a window with her long ears twitching in the faint currents of zero-gravity air. "Morning," she said without turning. "Or afternoon, depending on your human definition of time." "Morning, afternoon, space-time continuum," he replied, flexing his stiff arms. "I'm adaptable." She smirked at that, the corner of her mouth twitching upward. "You call that adaptability?" "Yes," he said. "Also called surviving with dignity, which I've just realized is overrated." He glanced around, eyes settling on the emergency console, blinking with alerts from the approaching mercenaries. "I suppose today is the day we either survive, die spectacularly, or invent a new form of comic chaos." She turned, her gaze sharp but amused. "That's one way to motivate yourself." They moved through the palace quickly, their laughter punctuating the tension. Drayden improvised weapons from palace energy conduits, wrapping them in duct tape and quips about how no human would ever understand the elegance of alien engineering. "I call this the confetti cannon because it's going to explode and look festive," he said, gesturing at a device that hummed dangerously. The princess shook her head, flicking her wrist to stabilize its output. "You are reckless," she said, long ears flicking. "Yes, and memorable," he replied, grinning. When the mercenary fleet arrived, the palace seemed to bend and twist in anticipation. Floating gardens drifted in spirals, bioluminescent plants shifted color, and energy shields shimmered along the walkways. Drayden ducked under a descending platform, narrowly avoiding collision, and muttered, "I've been in worse scrambles, but none with this much interior decorating." The princess shot him a look that was both warning and amused, then activated a panel with a swipe of her fingers. Energy lines surged, redirecting shields and rerouting power. Drayden raised an eyebrow. "I swear, every time I blink you're 10 steps ahead. Not fair." They engaged the first wave of mercenaries together. Drayden's human ingenuity, combined with her alien abilities, created a chaotic ballet of movement. He tossed improvised energy grenades with exaggerated arm swings, calling them human flair, while she manipulated kinetic fields, redirecting attacks with the precision of someone who had been trained for this her entire life. At one point, he tripped over a floating support cable and ended up swinging like a pendulum before landing on a mercenary in a tangle of limbs and wires. She laughed mid-battle. "You humans are strangely effective," she said, long ears flicking with amusement. By the time the main fleet broke through the outer shields, Drayden was covered in scorch marks, dust, and glowing residue from his own gadgets. "I think I qualify as a war hero now," he said, dusting himself off. "Or at least a very persistent nuisance." The princess didn't respond with words, but the way she nudged him out of harm's way and coordinated their defenses spoke volumes. "Persistent nuisance," she mused. "Yes, that seems accurate." Hours of battle passed, each moment a mix of danger and dark humor. Drayden joked about alien battle etiquette, pretending to bow mid-strike to an imaginary audience, which drew a sharp grin from the princess. "Stop performing," she snapped, flicking a wave of energy that sent 3 mercenaries spinning off into the distance. "Fine, fine, no applause," he said, hands raised. "Just a moment of admiration for your gravity-defying battle skills, nothing more." Finally, the last of the mercenaries fled, their ships retreating into the void with sputtering engines. Drayden slumped against a railing, exhausted, and muttered, "Well, that went better than I expected. Mostly." The princess approached, brushing dust from his jacket, long ears flicking. "You did not simply survive, you contributed." He blinked, trying to parse whether she meant it as praise or a warning. "I'll take it as praise," he said carefully. "Praise that comes with minor explosions, I presume." She smirked. "Yes, and future inconvenience." After the battle, the queen summoned Drayden. He entered the throne chamber, nervously straightening a jacket that had seen far too many explosions. The queen's gaze was measured, regal, and intimidating, but she did not look hostile. "You have saved my daughter," she said, voice like tempered glass. "And by extension, my people. You acted with compassion and ingenuity, qualities rare in your species." Drayden bowed awkwardly. "Thank you, your majesty. I also brought humor if that counts as a rare quality. Very rare, even." The queen's faint smile suggested she appreciated the jest. Then came the offer. Not wealth, not a title, but a position that would place him beside the royal family, influencing policy across the galaxy. "You may choose," she said. "Stay human, return to your simple life, or step into a role that could reshape worlds." Drayden's first instinct was to joke. "Do you have a step-by-step manual for this, or should I wing it?" She raised an eyebrow. "Winging it may be necessary. Guidance will come if you are willing to learn." He thought of the moons, the collapsed dome, the princess's laughter, the chaos of floating gardens, and the battles he had survived. He realized he had changed, not just in skill, but in perspective. Compassion, quick thinking, humor, and trust had become tools as vital as any weapon. He could navigate politics, danger, and alien society, and he could laugh while doing it. The universe was vast, perilous, and unpredictable, and he had learned to embrace it fully. "I accept," he said finally, with a grin that carried the weight of adventure and absurdity. "And I promise to provide occasional comic relief. Not to be underestimated, vital for morale." The princess laughed, eyes twinkling, long ears twitching in amusement. "You are unusual," she said. "I am aware," he replied, "and I assure you it works to your advantage." Life settled into a rhythm, with Drayden learning, laughing, and contributing in ways he had